Thank you, Ian, for your presentation today. Thank you for joining me now for this little chat and Q&A session. During the presentations, we did open up questions to the public, and we have had a number of questions asked specifically of your presentation. We have had some general questions as well, and I'll share those as well.
Yep.
So I'm going to jump around probably a little bit because I haven't compiled them, which is probably downside, but we'll give it a crack anyway. So the first question I've got here is, your knowledge on veteran firefighters is extensive. How do you capture this?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of rocks you got to lift and dig around and just speak to people. Initially, when I started, Peter Stathis and Bob Dobson, who's a retired assistant commissioner, helped me an awful lot, and also the records section at the fire brigade. A woman by the name of Swords, she's retired since these days, but she was a great help. And so my real starting point was the honour roll with those names in bronze there. And so that was the initial start of the names. And the further I got into research and getting personal service records and just information was available, the more names became apparent. And one thing I did which really kicked it along was I went out to the state records at Kingswood, and I got hold of the volunteer register, which is a handwritten book of every station and what firefighters were attached. So, for example, the volunteer register would have a name, and then it would say resigned for active service or killed at the Dardanelles and things like that. So that's just little pieces of gold information that's gold that led you further up the track.
I think something that's come up a lot today is the state records there at Kingswood. They've been mentioned by yourself and David quite a bit. So obviously,
that's a great facility. Yeah,
and for us being at Penrith, we're obviously just a stone's throw as well, so we utilise that facility as well. So definitely it's a good place to go if you are starting out research for yourself.
For sure.
We have someone asking, how important are photographs to your research?
Yeah, look, photographs, especially because I've researched people that that have died or were served so long ago. Any photo I can get that puts a face to a name is again absolute gold. And it just puts flesh on the name, to use a sort of analogy, and photos are invaluable. And the one I held up of the group in the rear yard at headquarters, which Mark passed on to me, I put that on Facebook, I think, or something, and a fellow was able to name just one of the people in that photo, and that's a good start. I mean, if I could name all those people, it'd be fantastic, because I've got citations of people who won bravery medals and things like that, but I don't have a picture of them, and I'd love to be able to put faces to those names and those people who performed outstanding acts of bravery.
I 100% agree with you as well. I know when we do the histories for the different stations, we are itching for photographs. We can sometimes have pages and pages of information, but not a single photograph. And something that we know about the public is they love to look at photographs. They don't necessarily want to sit there reading. For us, photographs are also incredibly important. And quite often, if we have a photograph, we're able to write a story around it. But if we only have information and no photograph, that story doesn't necessarily come to the limelight. Because if you look at social media these days, if we don't have a photograph, we can't post the story because no one's going to draw attention from it. So photographs are incredibly important. I'm going to jump around with some questions here. You obviously shared a few individual stories today. Are there any other stories of individuals that you find particularly inspirational or noteworthy that you didn't get to mention today?
Yeah. There's two others that spring to mind immediately. One was a fellow called William Stewart Kirkpatrick, and he was in the 6th Light Horse. And he went on to Gallipoli when that light horse unit landed, which would have been post 25 April. And he was mentioned in dispatches on the evacuation, the night of the evacuation. So he did some good work there. He helped the evacuation be a success, which was so important. And then he went on and served with the 6th Light Horse Regiment in Palestine, and he won a military medal over there. So again, he's performed an act of bravery. He was involved in help save another part of the regiment, another company. So he was able to attack the Turks who were attacking this other part, and he helped save them. So he came back home. He didn't rejoin the fire brigade, but then he re-enlisted for World War II when he was quite old. He would have been in his 40s. And he ended up in New Guinea. The army found out how old he was. They sent him back to Australia and discharged him. So being a pretty determined kind of guy, he went back up to New Guinea and joined the United States Small Ships unit. And so they did a lot of the small ancillary type boats around New Guinea. And I ended up speaking to a relative of his, and she told me that he'd actually got strafed by a Zero fighter and they all had to jump in the water and swim ashore and that kind of thing. So he sort of epitomises a bit of an action man, this guy. He hit a chord with me. And then another fellow, a New Zealander who was born in New Zealand and came to Australia, joined the fire brigade, then joined the AIF. Frederick Creek was his name. Now, when he was over in France, a big ammunition dump was bombed and caught on fire, and he gathered the guys around him, and with his firefighting knowledge and experience, he was able to put the fire out and save the ammunition and save people from the imminent explosions. And he was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. And he came back and rejoined the fire brigade and served until his retirement. And he was one of the guys that springs to mind when I talk about the experience in history that history gives us, for them to also contribute again when he came back to the fire brigade. He would have contributed a great amount, especially to teaching young firefighters who had joined and advanced into their careers.
Okay, so
that's two. Yeah.
Well, on the back of that question, someone someone has asked, what do you actually do with the research of these individuals?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I put together some self-published booklet, I suppose you'd call it, and it was the State Library accepted it into their collection, which I'm sort of very, very proud of. I put one in the New South Wales Fire Brigade Library, back when it was New South Wales Fire Brigade, and to the museum, of course. I recently sent you the disc with the updated version.
And I can vouch for the fact that we do actually use it quite a bit.
That's great. That's really pleasing to know, yeah. And basically, I'm happy to give it to anyone who's interested, because to me, the information is all about the people within it. You know, it's not like I'm trying to do something for myself. It's all about commemorating those people, and
that's great. And I think something that we didn't talk about in the presentation was the role that you do play when we put together the histories. And actually, this is going to segue into the next question, so I'm probably going to answer it without properly asking you the question. But when we do the different station books, quite often a station will have a bit of a history related to military service. So you might have a retained station who says, oh, look, back in World War I, we know that, you know, such and such passed away in the war because there's a memorial for him at the station, but nobody really knows anything about him. Or they may have a history of a number of people going off and serving in the war. They may have all survived, but they may have that sort of folklore knowledge. Where, Ian, your work comes in handy for us then is that we're able to contact you, and through your book as well, we're able to find that information for those specific people, which obviously we couldn't do because there is nowhere else to go. Nobody else has ever pulled all the information together like you have. So from our
that's great.
It's invaluable. The question actually was, Ian, can you describe your relationship with the museum? And I don't know whether I've answered that one for you or whether you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, well, I suppose when I started doing the work, so I started this in about 1994 when the internet really kicked off, I suppose, and I sort of started getting a fair bit of information together, and then I approached the museum and I sort of harassed Mark, I suppose, in a manner of speaking, and kept sending him discs of information and all that kind of thing. And so that Mark sort of obviously realised that there was something to be had in what I was sending him, and he contacted me and basically enlisted me as his person to ask questions about medals and honours and awards, and then as the military history stuff sort of increased, the knowledge increased. He's asking more questions about that. So yeah, it was just a mutual agreement, I suppose. And Mark said to me, "Look, we'll take you on as a consultant, so to speak." Mm-hmm. Nothing written, no contract, nothing like that. But I was just honoured to be involved in the museum and to be thought that my contribution was worthwhile. That was very pleasing.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, obviously, my role before being the CEO, I was the Heritage and Research Officer. So I was the one compiling all of that information. And obviously I have a history background and I know history quite well, but I had to learn a lot about the brigade. I've been doing it for 5 years now, so I think I know the brigade pretty well, but there's still aspects that we have subject experts such as yourself. So obviously, Ian, if we're doing something military related, we contact you. A massive part of the histories we do is the championships history. And the person that we have for that's John Hand. So we have for different aspects of history, someone who we call our professional, and they're the person that we call upon. So the museum could not exist and do the historic work we do without all this external assistance that we have. So for that, obviously, we do thank you, Ian. I have one final question here for you, and it relates to Ron Jenkins, who you spoke about today.
Yep.
So actually, I have two questions, sorry, but we'll ask this one first. So with Ron Jenkins, you were talking about the equipment, I believe it was, and it was believed that the equipment was faulty, but it turned out not to be.
Yeah, well, that was the initial conclusion. But when they did they got the mines authorities and everyone to check over the gear, because the mines authorities were the experts on closed circuit BA.
It is BA. That was the thing that.
Well, it was actually what they called a proto, which they don't use anymore.
And we actually
closed circuit.
have a new display at the museum on proto, so we might even work out which piece it was, and we might put a photo up on our website.
Yeah, okay. So they did investigations into it, and the equipment was found to be in good order, but he still died of monoxide poisoning. So there was, obviously something happened somewhere, and as I mentioned, there was.
Sorry, what year are we looking at?
1963. It's happened. Yeah. So, there was a lot of angst within the fire brigade, because one thing, the relative I spoke to also sent me all the paper clippings of the day, so which the museum has got. I put them all on a flash drive and gave them to you. To be somewhere. So all these paper clippings of the day. So I was getting or reading contemporary reports of the investigation and all that kind of thing. So it was really interesting, and they never really came to a definite conclusion, but they still realised they had to improve the systems and the equipment and the training and everything. So that progressed from there.
Okay, thank you for that. That turned out to be the penultimate question. So the final actual question. This one might be a little bit harder to answer, or it might be easy to answer. I don't actually know. When David Ty was giving his presentation, he spoke about the fact that women only were admitted into the brigade in 1985. Obviously, that's not a long period of time. The question relates to how you've come across women during your research. Obviously, we have the Women's Fire Auxiliary, but that's quite separate to the main field. So is there something that you've come across, or are women represented in your research?
Yeah, unfortunately, the Women's Auxiliary, I've never really come across any documentation in the stuff I've looked at, so I've missed out on that. I know Mark was looking into it, and he was the one who really brought the fact they existed to my attention. With contemporary veterans, I've been trying to keep roles of especially contemporary veterans in the brigade these days. So, you know, we're talking about Timor and Afghanistan, Iraq, all that kind of thing. So I have every female veteran that I've spoken to is in my current listings that that I'm keeping, and that they're really just things I'm compiling and sitting on, and I think they'll be used down the track a bit.
Definitely. I think it comes back to the fact as well that if you weren't compiling that list, there isn't a list that would exist. And what you do is invaluable to preserving the history. So thank you very much for your time, Ian. Thank you for doing this little chat. You're obviously a long way from Sydney, so I appreciate you being able to join us in this manner. And hopefully we'll get to work together a lot more in the future, which definitely I think we will.
Yeah, I look forward to it, Belinda. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Ian.
Bye then.